Tonight, we follow the wake of beings the shore tried to forget. Not angels and not men, but teachers who rose from the sea wearing the memory of the deep. They were called the Apkallu, half-fish sages who handed early humanity the tools of writing, number, law, and the stars. Their lessons lifted mud into cities and silence into history. Then someone tried to drown the story. Temples fell quiet, tablets vanished, and the keepers of time rewrote the script until the sea itself had to whisper the truth. From Eridu to Assyria, from secret rites to guarded vaults, the same shape returns in stone and in rumour, a promise that forbidden knowledge does not die, it hides. Tonight, we will ask who these teachers were, why their gifts were branded dangerous, and who still profits from the silence. If the past was edited, we will read the margins. If the truth was buried, we will follow the tide. Before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Some say the first teachers of mankind did not walk out of the forests or descend from the sky. They rose from the sea. Their bodies were part human, part fish, cloaked in scales that shimmered with knowledge older than time. To ancient Sumerians, they were not monsters. They were sages. They came before empires, before kings, before even the written word, and they came with a purpose. They were called the Apkallu. The story begins not in a temple or a battlefield, but along the shores of the Persian Gulf. It was here, thousands of years ago, that people claimed to see something impossible. A being stepped from the waves. Not entirely man, not entirely fish, but something in between. He spoke, he taught, and then each night he returned to the sea. His name was Owans. But he was only the first. There were others, 6 more like him, each one bearing new wisdom, how to write, how to measure the stars, how to build cities and govern people. The Apkallu did not conquer, they instructed. They were not gods in the way we think of gods. They didn't demand temples or sacrifices. Instead, they gave humanity the tools to rise. But here's the strange part. No one knows where they came from, and no one knows why they vanished. Ancient texts like the Babylonian King List and fragments from the Enuma Elish mention them briefly, almost cautiously, as if their presence was both sacred and dangerous. What kind of beings were they, that kings would remember them as advisors, yet priests feared them as threats? Were they divine messengers, or something else entirely? Some scholars say they were myth. Others whisper they were survivors of a lost civilization. There's even a theory that they were beings from another realm, not gods, but watchers, guardians of forbidden truths. If that's true, then the question becomes, what was so dangerous about the knowledge they gave? The world they entered was young, scattered, and raw. Early humans had no cities, no writing, no understanding of the stars. Then, suddenly, around the city of Eridu, civilization bloomed. The timeline doesn't make sense. Cultures usually evolve slowly, but Sumer's leap forward was like a spark in the dark, and the Apkallu were at the center of it. But not everyone welcomed them. In later myths, after the Great Flood, the Apkallu were described as corrupted, half-breeds, no longer divine. Their knowledge was no longer seen as a gift, but as a threat. From saviors to heretics, from teachers to demons, something had changed, or someone had rewritten the story. And that's where it starts to feel familiar. Because whenever forbidden knowledge appears in history, it's not long before someone tries to bury it. So maybe the Apkallu didn't disappear. Maybe they were erased. Erased from records, from memory, from everything except the oldest clay tablets that somehow survived. but the sea never forgets. And sometimes, when the tide is just right and the world grows quiet, you can still hear the whisper beneath the waves, not of monsters, but of ancient teachers waiting to be remembered. Long before Rome, before Egypt, before even Babylon rose to power, there was Sumer, a flat, sun-baked land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers where something unexpected happened. Cities were born, language took shape, and the stars were mapped with a precision that still puzzles modern scientists. But the people of Sumer didn't credit themselves. They said they had help. From beings not of this world, not of this land, but of the deep, the Apkallu. In the oldest surviving records of human history, written in wedge-shaped cuneiform on tablets of clay, the names of these beings are preserved. In the Babylonian king list, a strange document that blends myth and monarchy, it says that before the Great Flood, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, and they were advised by the Apkallu. These beings weren't just part of legend. They were placed alongside real kings, treated not as gods, but as instructors. The line between myth and memory is thin, and Sumerian scribes seem to believe that Apkallu were both. They appear again in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, where the chaos of the universe is tamed, not by war, but by knowledge. The Apkallu emerge not as warriors, but as bearers of order. They bring writing, they bring astronomy, they explain how to measure time and divide land. Imagine a world where the sun rose and set without meaning. Then one day, someone teaches you how to track it, how to build a calendar, how to record events in symbols. That is what the Apkallu brought. Sumerians credited these beings with teaching them how to read the skies, build irrigation systems, form laws, and preserve history. These weren't small lessons. They were the foundation of civilization, and yet the Apkallu weren't worshipped in the same way as other deities. They had no temples, no large statues, no sacrifices. It's as if they weren't meant to be permanent. They came, they taught, and they vanished. Their legacy was knowledge, not power. What's strange is how quickly their names were forgotten. Later cultures, like the Akkadians and Babylonians, kept their stories alive only in fragments. A list here, a line there. It's almost like someone was trying to erase them, but couldn't do it completely. The evidence had already been written into stone. Some of their names still survive. Uwana, the first. Enmeduka, Enmegalama. Each one linked to a king, each one associated with a gift of wisdom. 7 in total. A sacred number, appearing again and again in ancient traditions. 7 sages, 7 lights in the sky, 7 secrets passed down. But who were they really? Were they memories of a lost civilization, remnants of a world that came before the flood? Or were they something else entirely, visitors from a realm we still don't understand? The Sumerians never explained, they just recorded. And what they left behind still echoes today in laws, calendars, and the simple act of writing. The oldest texts of humanity don't begin with kings or war. They begin with teachers. And the first names they remembered were not human. They were the Apkallu. Before Babylon, before Nineveh, there was Eridu, a forgotten city at the edge of the desert where the rivers met the sea. To the Sumerians, Eridu was the first city ever built, not by kings or warriors, but under the guidance of 7 strange beings who came from the water. They were the Apkallu, the 7 sages of Eridu, and each one, according to legend, brought a different gift. Not weapons or treasure, but pieces of civilization itself. Their names are written in clay tablets found buried in ancient ruins, names that sound almost like echoes from another world. Uana, the first, sometimes called Oans by later writers, was said to have risen from the sea wearing the skin of a fish. He taught humans how to build, how to farm, and most importantly, how to write. He was the bridge between silence and speech, between chaos and structure. After him came Uanaduga, a sage who brought the knowledge of law and judgment. He was said to have taught the early kings how to rule fairly, how to create order without violence. Then there was Enmaduga, who gave the people wisdom in rituals and sacred rites, showing them how to align their actions with the movements of the stars. The fourth, Enmegalama, was the architect. He gave humanity the understanding of measurements, proportions, and construction. Not just how to build walls, but how to build temples in harmony with the heavens. Following him was Enmebuluga, who was said to have introduced agriculture and the secrets of the land. It was through him that humans learned to tame the soil and grow with the rhythm of the seasons. The sixth sage was Annenlilda, the one who revealed the arts of music and healing. His wisdom touched not just the body, but the soul. And finally, there was Utuapsu, the sage of prophecy and signs, who read omens in the wind and messages in the stars. He did not teach how to predict the future, but how to listen to it. Together, these seven were more than just wise men. They were living symbols of what it meant to build a civilization, each one representing a layer of human development: writing, justice, ritual, architecture, farming, healing, and foresight. When they stood together, Eridu rose as the first city, not just of buildings, but of ideas. But they were not worshipped like gods. They were not praised in hymns or given offerings. They were remembered as guides, teachers who stepped onto the land for a short time and then vanished. And yet, what they left behind shaped the ancient world. Every law code, every temple, every map of the stars can trace its roots back to Eridu and the seven who stood there. Some say they came from the sea. Others believe they were survivors from a lost world. A few even suggest they were something far older than history itself. But what remains clear is that they did not come to rule. They came to teach. And in doing so, they lit a fire that would never be fully extinguished. The seven sages of Eridu were the first memory of humanity's forgotten instructors. They say he rose from the sea at dawn, stepping onto the shore in silence. His body shimmered with scales, part man, part fish. To the terrified eyes of early humans, he must have looked like a god. But he did not demand worship. He asked for no altar, no offering. He came only to teach. His name was Owanes. To the Babylonians, he was known as Uana, the first of the seven Apkallu. But to later historians, especially the Greek writer Berossus, he became Owans, a mysterious figure who appeared each morning from the waters of the Persian Gulf and returned to the deep each night. He was not born of the land. He was a messenger of the sea, and what he brought was something no one had ever seen before: knowledge. Owans found a world still crawling out of the mud. The people had no writing, no laws, no cities. They lived by instinct and fear. But this strange visitor changed everything. During the day, he spoke with them in perfect language, taught them how to build shelters, how to farm, how to live together without tearing each other apart. He showed them how to observe the stars and mark the seasons, how to heal wounds, and how to remember their own stories. Then, when the sun began to set, he would return to the water, disappearing beneath the waves as quietly as he had come. This routine went on for years. Every day, Oans would rise from the deep and guide humanity towards something greater. And every night, he would vanish again, never resting among them, always a stranger. Why did he never stay? That question still haunts every version of his story. Some say he belonged to another world, one not meant for land or sky. Others believe he feared what humans might do with too much knowledge too soon. But whatever the reason, his visits never stopped until his mission was complete. When humans could write, speak, and think for themselves, he disappeared for good. To the Sumerians, he was not just a teacher. He was the first bringer of light in a world that had never known fire. Not the fire of flame, but the fire of understanding. He didn't just tell people what to do, he gave them tools to shape their own future. And that may be why he was later feared. Think about it. A being who teaches humans how to read the stars, build empires, and question everything around them. That kind of figure doesn't just educate, he disrupts. He changes the very nature of power. And in a world where control often depends on silence, someone like Oans is dangerous. His name does not appear in school textbooks. His statues are gone. Most people have never heard of him. And yet, every time you write a word, follow a calendar, or look up at the night sky and wonder, you are standing in the shadow of a messenger who came from the sea, a teacher who never claimed a throne, never built a temple, and never asked for loyalty, only understanding. That was Oans, the first messenger, the first light, and maybe, just maybe, the first savior of mankind. When the Apkallu first stepped onto land, they brought fire to a world still stumbling in darkness. Not the fire of flames, but the fire of thought. They gave early humans the keys to unlock writing, mathematics, medicine, architecture, astronomy, and law. With their guidance, mud huts became cities. Wandering tribes became organized societies. Chaos turned into civilization. But was this sudden leap truly a gift? Or was it something else? Something far more dangerous? In the beginning, the Apkallu were celebrated as wise sages, divine messengers sent to raise humanity from ignorance. But not all myths kept that version. As time passed, stories changed. What was once seen as sacred began to look suspicious. Why would beings from the sea share knowledge so powerful it could challenge the gods? And what if humanity was never meant to know these things so early? The idea of forbidden knowledge shows up in almost every ancient culture. The Garden of Eden, Prometheus stealing fire, the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. Again and again, someone brings truth to mankind, and again they are punished. The bringers are cast out. The knowledge is labeled heresy. The message is always the same. Certain truths were not meant for us. In Sumerian myths, this shift is clear. Before the flood, the Apkallu were pure, fully divine. But after the flood, something changes. The ones who appear are part human, part god, and their offspring are no longer seen as wise. They are called corrupted. Monsters, threats. The sages had become symbols of rebellion, and their teachings were suddenly suspect. What happened? Did their wisdom become twisted? Or did someone twist the story to hide what really happened? Imagine this. A group of powerful beings teach humans how to count the stars, build temples, and understand the hidden laws of the universe. But then, new rulers rise who want control. They don't want people thinking too much, so the old knowledge is rebranded. It is not truth, it is poison, and those who seek it are not wise, they are dangerous. This is the moment when the line between knowledge and contamination is drawn, not by the Apkallu, but by those who came after, those who feared what humanity could become if they knew too much. And so, piece by piece, the teachings of the sages were buried, rewritten, or burned. What remained were half-truths, myths, and warnings. But the question still lingers. Were the Apkallu divine messengers trying to help us evolve? Or were they breaking some ancient rule, opening doors too early, pushing a fragile species beyond its limits? Maybe both are true. Maybe knowledge always carries a cost. And maybe the price for wisdom is the risk of corruption. The story of the Apkallu is not just about ancient teachers. It is about a choice that still haunts us today. To seek truth, even when it is forbidden. To ask questions, even when the answers are dangerous. Because the line between enlightenment and destruction is often drawn in silence. And sometimes, the ones who try to help us shine are remembered as the ones who led us into the dark. In the beginning, we are told the world was shaped by divine hands. But the deeper you look, the more those hands begin to multiply. Across different cultures, separated by time and distance, the same story begins to repeat. Beings from the sky or the sea descend to Earth. They find early humans lost, frightened, and vulnerable. And instead of ruling over them, they teach, they share knowledge, they guide. But soon after, the story always turns. That same knowledge is declared forbidden. The teachers are labeled as traitors, and their gifts are recast as weapons. In ancient Mesopotamia, those beings were called the Apkallu. In the Hebrew tradition, they appear as the Watchers. Both are described as divine or semi-divine. Both descend to Earth, and both do the unthinkable. They help humanity. The Book of Enoch, a forgotten text once widely read but later banned from the Bible, tells the story in detail. A group of 200 celestial beings, called the Watchers, descend from the heavens. They are supposed to observe. But they break the rules. They fall in love with human women. They teach forbidden arts, astronomy, metallurgy, writing, herbal medicine, enchantment. These are the same teachings the Apkallu were praised for. Yet here they are framed as crimes. The Watchers are punished. Their children, the Nephilim, are labeled monsters, giants who spread destruction. The Great Flood, according to Enoch, is not just a reset for a wicked world. It is a cleansing of knowledge, a way to wipe the slate clean. Sound familiar? The parallels are hard to ignore. Apkallu and Watchers, two sides of the same coin, both descended from above or beyond. Both brought light to a dark world, and both were erased, not by time, but by choice. But what if they were never separate myths? What if they are two branches of the same ancient root? A single story passed down and reshaped depending on who held power. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu were honored, at least for a while. In later Hebrew texts, the same beings became warnings. Same knowledge, different interpretation. There is a pattern here. Knowledge arrives. It changes everything. Then fear takes over, and those who brought the knowledge are turned into villains. The past is edited. The heroes become monsters, and the light they shared is hidden in vaults and scripture, buried beneath layers of translation and doctrine. Maybe the reason Genesis feels incomplete is because its missing chapters were stripped away on purpose. Maybe Enoch was removed not because it was false, but because it revealed too much. And maybe the Apkallu and the Watchers are fragments of a truth too big, too old, and too dangerous for those who built their power on silence. But stories have a way of surviving, even in whispers, even in forbidden books. And if the same myth echoes through both Genesis and Sumer, then maybe it was never a myth at all. Maybe it was a memory, one we were never supposed to remember. We are all told the story as children, a world filled with wickedness, a divine warning, a righteous man building a massive boat. And then the flood comes. Rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights. The earth is cleansed. The slate is wiped clean. But that version of the story, the one in the book of Genesis, is only one telling. And like all official stories, it leaves something out. Because according to the Sumerians, the flood was never just about punishing sin. It was about erasing something dangerous, knowledge. Long before the Bible was written, the ancient people of Mesopotamia carved their own version of the flood into clay tablets. One of the oldest is the story of Ziusudra, also known as Utnapishtim in later Akkadian texts. He is the Sumerian Noah, chosen not just for his purity, but because he held the wisdom of the old world, a wisdom the gods had grown afraid of. The flood, according to the Sumerians, was not sent because people were evil. It was sent because they were waking up. The Apkallu had taught them too much. They were learning to read the stars, bend metal, record history, and heal the body. Humanity was no longer crawling, it was standing. And to some of the gods, that was unacceptable. So the decision was made, not just to destroy the people, but to drown the knowledge, to sink it beneath mud and water, to break the chain of memory. The flood was not a reset, it was a purge, a targeted erasure of everything the Apkallu had given. But it did not go exactly as planned. In the Sumerian version, the god Enki secretly warns Ziusudra of the coming flood. He tells him to build a great boat, not only to save himself and the animals, but to carry something else: scrolls, tablets, seeds of knowledge, fragments of a lost world. And when the waters finally recede, Ziusudra emerges not as a survivor, but as a bridge between two ages. One before the flood, and one after. This idea of knowledge surviving the flood appears again and again. In Egyptian myths, in Mesoamerican legends, even in later Gnostic writings. In each story, someone hides the truth before the wave hits. Someone preserves the spark before the flame is drowned. Which raises a question. If the flood was meant to erase forbidden knowledge, then what exactly was saved? And where is it now? Some believe the tablets of the Apkallu were hidden in mountain caves or sealed in the walls of ancient cities. Others think their teachings were passed down secretly through priesthoods, mystery schools, or even bloodlines. What matters is this: the knowledge was not entirely lost. It only went underground. So the next time you hear the story of Noah's Ark, remember this. It might not be a tale of sin and redemption. It might be the oldest example of censorship in history. A moment when someone tried to delete the past and failed, because some truths refuse to drown, even when the whole world is underwater. After the flood, something was different. The world looked clean on the surface, but underneath, the echoes of what came before still lingered. The Apkallu, those ancient sages who once walked the land as divine messengers, were no longer fully welcome. Their era had ended, but they had not disappeared. Not completely. Something stranger had taken their place. Beings who were no longer purely divine, no longer entirely of the water or the sky. The post-flood Apkallu were hybrids, and their legacy would shake the foundation of both myth and memory. In the oldest Mesopotamian writings, The pre-flood Apkallu were described as perfect, divine, holy. But the ones who came after the flood were described very differently. They were part God, part man, not born of heaven, but of a strange union. The line between human and divine had been blurred, and the result was something unpredictable. These new Apkallu were no longer trusted. Their wisdom became suspect. Their children were feared. Ancient texts called them corrupted, not because they were evil, but because they were mixed. The world they were born into was afraid of what they represented. Power without control. Knowledge without permission. Now compare this to the Book of Enoch. It describes the Watchers, those fallen angels who descended to earth and taught forbidden arts, just like the Apkallu. But the Watchers went further. They took human women as wives, and from that union came the Nephilim, giants, hybrids, creatures that were neither man nor angel, beings who defied order and brought chaos. In both stories, something is born that breaks the rules. In both stories, these children are seen as threats. And in both stories, their existence leads to catastrophe. Was this just coincidence? Or were the Nephilim and the post-flood Apkallu two versions of the same memory? The idea of hybrid beings is not just religious myth. It is everywhere. From ancient Greece with its demigods to Egypt's pharaohs who claimed divine blood. The pattern is clear. The moment divine knowledge enters human bloodlines, control becomes impossible. The gods panic, and someone always tries to erase the mistake. But what if it wasn't a mistake? What if the real threat wasn't the hybrids themselves, but what they knew? They were born with memories from before the flood. They remembered the old knowledge. They carried the teachings of the Apkallu in their minds, in their blood, and that made them dangerous. So they were hunted, demonized, called monsters, cast out of the records. But their shadows remain, in the cracks between myths, in the stories whispered through secret societies, in the ruins that seem too advanced for their time. The hybrid curse was never about blood. It was about memory. A living memory of a world that was not supposed to survive. A memory that couldn't be drowned, burned, or buried. So it was rewritten. The children of wisdom became children of chaos. The line between sage and monster was drawn, and humanity was told to forget. But some stories, like some bloodlines, never truly fade. They just wait, hidden in plain sight, for the world to be ready to remember them again. In the beginning, the names of the Apkallu were written boldly across clay tablets. Their stories were told in temples and taught to kings. They were described as sages, beings who shaped civilization with their knowledge. But as the centuries passed, something strange happened. The names faded. The stories grew shorter. And eventually, the Apkallu nearly vanished from the records. Not because the clay eroded or the tablets broke, but because someone chose silence. This silence is not natural. The Mesopotamians were obsessive record keepers. They documented everything from crops to star positions to political scandals. And yet, after a certain point in history, the Apkallu disappear. It is like they were erased mid-sentence. The question is, why? One answer might lie in power. In the early days of Sumer, knowledge was power, and those who brought it were honored. But as empires rose and religious systems became more rigid, the idea of independent wisdom became dangerous. If knowledge could come from ancient fish beings or sea messengers, then it did not need to come from priests. It did not need to be filtered through temples or controlled by sacred texts. That was a problem. As religious authority shifted, especially in the transition from the Sumerians to the Babylonians and then to the Assyrians, the story of the Apkallu became less about truth and more about threat. The church of the time, if it can be called that, needed to protect its authority. And that meant cutting out anything that suggested humans could learn from someone else, especially someone who came from the sea. Later tablets only mention the Apkallu in passing, sometimes as figures of the past, sometimes as corrupted beings, sometimes not at all. Their legacy is trapped in the cracks between myths, hinted at, but never fully explained. This is what historians call a narrative shift. The story did not disappear, it was rewritten. There are signs of this silence. In earlier texts, the Apkallu are described in detail, including their names, their teachings, and their deeds. But later texts focus on kings and battles. Power moves from knowledge to violence, from sages to soldiers. It is like humanity forgot how it got here, or was made to forget. This pattern repeats throughout history. When those in control want to reshape the story, they do not burn every book. They just stop talking about the ones that matter. The silence grows. The memory fades. And within a few generations, no one even knows what was lost. But the clay remembers. Buried beneath sand and time, the oldest tablets still whisper. They speak of a time before control, before silence, when the Apkallu walked among us and helped light the fire of civilization. That fire still burns, faint, hidden, waiting for someone to listen. Because silence is not just the absence of words, it is the presence of fear. And in the case of the Apkallu, it is a silence carved into clay, a warning, a secret, and maybe even a key. If you ever walk the halls of a museum and stand before the towering stone walls of ancient Assyria, you will notice something strange. Figures carved in perfect detail, standing tall with muscular arms, long beards, and solemn eyes. But draped over their bodies is not a royal robe or a soldier's armor. It is a fish. A full fish, head resting atop the man's head, tail hanging down his back like a cloak. It looks bizarre, out of place. But it is no costume. It is a message, a symbol, and it leads us straight back to the Apkallu. These fish-garbed figures appear again and again in Assyrian wall reliefs, especially from the palaces of kings like Ashurnasirpal II, who ruled in the 9th century before Christ. They are always in the same poses. One hand raised in blessing, the other holding a small bucket or a pine cone. Around them, winged creatures and strange symbols float in the stone. But the most striking detail is the fish cloak. It is impossible to ignore. Mainstream scholars often label these figures as priests, ritual performers, members of a holy class preserving sacred traditions. But what if they were doing something more than just performing? What if they were not just honouring the Apkallu, but becoming them? The fish cloak was not just decoration, it was transformation. To wear the skin of a fish in this context was to step into the memory of the Apkallu, to take on their role, their knowledge, their authority. These were not simple ceremonies. They were reenactments of something much older, a time when wisdom rose from the sea. And look closer at the tools they carry. The pine cone, dipped into the bucket, resembles an act of anointing, a blessing. But scholars have long debated what the bucket actually contained. Some say water, others say sacred pollen or magical herbs. Whatever it was always connected to life, growth, purity, perhaps even memory. The fish-garbed priests were not alone in using fish symbolism. The god Dagon, worshipped by the Philistines was also shown as part man, part fish. And in later traditions, the early Christian symbol of the fish would quietly carry echoes of something older, something deeper. These patterns suggest that the image of the fish was more than cultural. It was universal, a clue left behind in plain sight. But why would the Assyrians, a powerful military empire, embrace the image of a fishman teacher from Sumer's earliest myths? Because even kings bow to time. The Assyrians inherited the ruins of Eridu, the broken cities of Sumer, and with them came the stories, the symbols, the rituals. They knew that behind every sword and throne was a story that needed to feel eternal. The Apkallu gave them that. So they carved the sages into the walls, not as enemies, not as gods, but as something in between. And by wearing their skins, the priests of Assyria were not just keeping the past alive, they were channeling it, standing in the doorway between now and then, between land and sea, between man and something more. And maybe that door has never truly closed. The ocean is vast and silent. It hides things, swallows them, preserves them in darkness where time seems to slow. Maybe that is why so many ancient cultures believed wisdom came from the sea. Not just physical survival, but knowledge, secrets hidden beneath the surface. And rising from that depth, again and again, is the same shape, a fish, a figure, a teacher that does not belong to the land. From Sumer to West Africa, from Israel to India, the image returns, the fishman, the waterborne sage, the voice from the deep. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu were half man, half fish beings who emerged from the Persian Gulf and taught humanity how to live. In nearby cultures, the god Dagon appears. He is often shown with a fishtail or fish head. Worshipped by the Philistines and others, Dagon was connected not just to grain and fertility, but to knowledge. And the connection to the sea was never a mistake. Further west, the Dogon people of Mali tell a story of beings called the Nomo. They too came from the sky or the water, depending on the version. They were amphibious, fish-like in appearance, and they brought with them knowledge of the stars. Knowledge far beyond what isolated tribal people could have known. The Dogon knew of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, long before Western telescopes confirmed its existence. How? In India, the god Vishnu takes the form of Matsya, a great fish, during the time of the flood. Matsya warns a man of the coming disaster, saves him, along with the sacred texts of knowledge. Again, the theme repeats. A fish form savior, a flood, a rescue of wisdom. The pattern is too exact to be coincidence. In early Christianity, the fish was one of the first secret symbols of believers. Before the cross, there was the fish. It stood for Jesus, for rebirth, for faith hidden in plain sight. But perhaps it also stood for something older, a memory, a story the church inherited but never fully explained. Why does this symbol appear in so many places? Why does it always connect to knowledge, salvation, and the deep? It is as if ancient people all remembered the same thing. A time when wisdom rose from the water. A being, or beings, who did not come to conquer, but to teach. And over time, that memory was carved into symbols, passed down in rituals, hidden in myths that look different on the surface, but all echo the same shape below. The fish is not just an animal. It is a code, a reminder that the greatest truths are not always found in the sky, but in the depths, in what is hidden, what is submerged, and perhaps what still waits to be found. The symbols of the deep do not shout. They whisper. They pull us beneath the surface into older currents. currents that connect ancient Sumer to forgotten tribes, lost temples, and secret stars. Because wisdom does not always come from above. Sometimes it rises from below, wrapped in scales, carrying a message, waiting for someone to listen. Some stories are not erased, they are buried, covered not with dirt, but with doctrine, sealed behind stained glass and Latin scrolls. The Vatican, seat of one of the most powerful religious institutions in history, holds more than gold and relics. It holds silence. And one of the deepest silences it keeps is about the beings who first brought knowledge to mankind. The Apkallu, the watchers, the sages from the deep. Call them what you like. The pattern is always the same. They came, they taught, and then they were erased. In the early church, there was a sharp line drawn between divine revelation and forbidden knowledge. Prophets were celebrated, but only the right ones, only those approved by the emerging religious elite. Anyone who brought knowledge outside of that system was labeled a heretic, a demon, or worse, a myth. The Apkallu fall into that space. They were teachers. They helped humanity before there was religion as we know it. That made them dangerous. Take the Book of Enoch. Once read by early Christians, and even quoted in the New Testament, it tells the story of the Watchers. Divine beings who descend to earth and teach humans writing, astronomy, and medicine. These are the exact same teachings attributed to the Apkallu in Mesopotamia. But instead of being honoured, the Watchers are cast down. Their knowledge is cursed. Their children become monsters. The book itself is eventually banned. Not because it was untrue, but because it said too much. Why would the church want to suppress a story like that? Because it rewrites the origin of knowledge. It suggests that wisdom came not from a single chosen prophet, but from outside the system, from beings who operated before the Bible, before Abraham, before even Genesis. If the Apkallu are remembered, then the church loses control of the timeline. And control of the timeline means control of the truth. But here is where it gets strange. The early prophets in the Bible share traits with the Apkallu. They speak with divine authority. They receive visions. They bring laws, calendars, and messages that reshape civilizations. Figures like Moses, who comes down from a mountain carrying commandments. Or Noah, warned of a flood to preserve life and knowledge. Their roles mirror the Apkallu. Yet one group is divine, the other demonic. Maybe the difference was not in what they did, but in who told their story. The Apkallu existed outside the script, and so the church had to make a decision. Include them and risk confusion, or erase them and write a new beginning. They chose erasure. The silence began. Today, the Vatican still holds one of the largest archives on Earth. Miles of shelves, thousands of documents never seen by the public. What stories wait in that darkness? What names are written in ink too dangerous to speak? The Apkallu are not gone. Their memory lives in symbols, in forbidden texts, in the cracks between approved scripture. They are the original teachers. And maybe that is the problem. Because a world built on control cannot allow the first light to come from the sea. It must come from the church. So the fishmen were drowned in silence, not by water, but by words. Before there was Babylon, before Egypt raised its pyramids, before even the stories of Genesis were written, there was a city called Eridu. Most people have never heard of it. But according to the ancient Sumerians, it was the very first city ever built, not by kings or warriors, but by divine beings who came from the sea, the Apkallu. To them, Eridu was not just a city. It was the birthplace of civilization, a place where the sky met the water and the old knowledge began. And some now ask the question no one was supposed to ask. Was Eridu the real Atlantis? When people think of Atlantis, they think of Plato, a lost island, swallowed by the sea, filled with advanced technology and wisdom that the world was not ready for. A place that vanished in a single day and night. But Plato never claimed to invent the story. He said it came from older sources, passed down through Egyptian priests. And what if those priests were remembering something real? Something much older than Greek philosophy. Something buried in Mesopotamian mud. Eridu sits at the edge of ancient Sumer, near what is now the Persian Gulf. It was a city of temples, canals, and rituals. And it was closely tied to the Apkallu, the fish-like sages who rose from the water to teach humanity the secrets of life. Writing, law, agriculture, astronomy. All the tools needed to build a world. It was not just a city. It was a school, a sanctuary, and maybe a warning. Because like Atlantis, Eridu disappeared. Not in a single cataclysmic day, but slowly. Buried under time, politics, and shifting sands. Later cities like and Uruk took the spotlight. The old names were forgotten, the tablets were broken, and the Apkallu faded into myth, just like the Atlanteans. But the similarities run deeper. Both Atlantis and Eridu are described as places where divine knowledge met human ambition. Both are said to have fallen after a flood. Both are connected to beings who were part human, part divine. And both are missing. Not in the sense of being physically lost, but in the sense that their true stories have been buried. Hidden behind symbols, renamed by later powers, reshaped to fit safer narratives. Imagine if Plato's Atlantis was not a Greek story at all, but a distant echo of Sumerian memory. A filtered version of Eridu's rise and fall, told through generations of priests and scribes. By the time it reached Athens, it had become a myth, but the bones were still there. Eridu was a real place. Archaeologists have uncovered its ruins, its ziggurat, its canals, its strange rituals. And in those ruins lie clues to something far greater than just another ancient city. They point to a lost age of wisdom, an age guided by teachers from the sea. An age that ended, not by accident, but by design. Atlantis by another name, not lost in the ocean, but buried in silence, waiting. And now, piece by piece, the mud is being washed away, and Eridu is whispering again. Somewhere in the shadows of early Christianity, a different voice was speaking. A voice that said creation itself was flawed, that the world we live in was not the perfect work of a loving God, but a prison built by a lesser power. And that hidden deep within this broken reality was a spark of something older, purer, and forgotten. These were the Gnostics, and their message was not welcome. The Gnostics believed in knowledge, not book learning, but something deeper, a remembering, a secret truth buried inside the human soul that had been locked away by false gods and blind rulers. To awaken this knowledge was to escape the illusion of the world, to break free from the trap of flesh and return to the light. And strangely enough, their teachings sound like a distant echo of the Apkallu. In Gnostic texts, like those found at Nag Hammadi in Egypt in the year 1945, we see a pattern. Beings from above or beyond who bring hidden wisdom. A flawed creation brought about by arrogance, a secret knowledge that must be passed down through symbols and whispers. It mirrors the story of the Apkallu, ancient sages rising from the sea to teach humans forbidden truths. Truths later buried by priests and rewritten by empires. One of the central ideas in Gnostic belief is the demiurge, a false creator god who builds the material world and then lies about it, tells humanity that this is all there is, that he is the only god. But behind the demiurge stands something greater, a source of true light, and the only way to reach it is through gnosis, through inner revelation, through awakening. That is almost identical to the idea that the Apkallu were not gods, but messengers, that they came to guide us back to something we once had and lost. Even in the early church, figures like Jesus were sometimes interpreted by Gnostic sects not as a saviour through blood, but as a revealer of secret knowledge, a divine teacher who came to awaken what was already inside us. That would explain why Gnostic Gospels were banned, why their followers were hunted, why their texts were burned. Because they threatened the same thing the Apkallu once did, a version of truth that could not be controlled. What if the Apkallu tradition did not disappear? What if it simply went underground? Hidden within mystical forms of early Christianity, preserved by outcast monks, protected in secret writings passed from teacher to student across centuries, waiting for a time when the world would be ready to hear the old stories again. The Gnostics may have lost the battle for the official version of Christianity, but their fingerprints are everywhere, in the quiet questions that never go away, in the hunger for truth that feels older than words, in the feeling that something important was taken from us a long time ago. Maybe the Apkallu never left. Maybe their voice just changed form. And maybe the Gnostics were trying to carry that voice forward, whispering across time, hoping someone would listen. The earliest myths tell us the Apkallu came from the sea not to conquer, but to teach. They brought tools, not weapons. Their gifts weren't gold or power, but ideas. Dangerous ones. Ideas that could change how humans lived, thought, and ruled. And maybe that is why their legacy was buried. Because the knowledge they gave was not just useful. It was liberating. It opened doors that some believed should have stayed shut. The Apkallu are credited with delivering 4 powerful forms of knowledge: architecture, astronomy, metallurgy, and magic. On the surface, these sound like simple disciplines. But in the ancient world, they were the foundation of civilization, the keys to understanding both the heavens and the earth, and each one carried secrets that made rulers nervous. First came architecture, the ability to measure, align, and build. The Apkallu taught how to turn mud into temples and stones into ziggurats. They introduced sacred geometry, the idea that numbers and shapes reflect the structure of the universe. Cities were no longer thrown together. They were designed with intention, following patterns found in stars and rivers. Buildings became symbols, and those who understood how to build them controlled not just space, but meaning. Then came astronomy, not just looking at the stars, but reading them. The Apkallu taught people to track the sun, the moon, and the movements of the planets. This was not superstition. It was science, wrapped in myth. The heavens became a clock, a calendar, a cosmic language. Farmers could predict floods. Kings could plan harvests. Priests could link events on Earth to patterns in the sky. And over time, that power was monopolized. Only certain people were allowed to read the stars. For everyone else, it became forbidden. Metallurgy was next. Fire and ore. The ability to extract metal from stone and shape it into tools, weapons, or symbols. The Apkallu were said to have taught humans how to use copper and bronze. Later myths claim that this kind of knowledge was dangerous, especially when tied to the watchers from the Book of Enoch. They too taught metallurgy, and they were punished for it, because the ability to shape metal meant the ability to shape destiny. It gave ordinary people control over the elements, and that was not something the gods or kings wanted to share. Last came magic, not stage tricks or illusions, but the understanding of energy, language, and intention. The Apkallu taught the use of incantations, herbs, sacred names. They introduced rituals that connected the physical and spiritual worlds. Over time, these teachings were labeled heresy, witchcraft, paganism. But in their original form, they were tools for healing, protection, and understanding the unseen. All four of these teachings were slowly locked away, restricted to temples, controlled by priesthoods, and later demonized by emerging religions. Not because they were false, but because they were true, too true. And truth, when given to the people, always threatens those in power. The Apkallu did not just give knowledge, they gave freedom. And that may be why their names were chiseled out of history. Not because they failed, but because they succeeded, and the world was never the same. In every ancient myth where knowledge is given to humanity, a punishment soon follows. It is never just a gift, it is a crime. And the one who dares to lift the veil always pays a price. Prometheus steals fire from the gods and is chained to a rock, his liver eaten each day. The Watchers teach forbidden arts and are sealed beneath mountains, and the Apkallu, the wise fish sages of Sumer, meet a similar end, once honoured, then erased. In the earliest texts, the Apkallu are divine, perfect beings sent from the deep to guide humanity out of chaos. They help build cities, create laws, teach writing and astronomy. They are the lights in the darkness. But something changes. After the Great Flood, the Apkallu who appear are no longer fully divine. They are hybrids, mixed, and the tone of the stories begins to shift. The beings once praised become symbols of danger. Knowledge becomes something to fear. Some stories suggest the Apkallu were cast out. Others hint they were hunted. Their names stop appearing in later tablets. Their teachings are broken into fragments and scattered. The clean line of wisdom they once carried is snapped in half. The fall of the Apkallu is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet, almost like a cover-up. But their fate mirrors a pattern we see everywhere. The bearer of forbidden knowledge must always fall, not because they are evil, but because they break the order. They give humans something they are not supposed to have. The gods or rulers or priests declare it unnatural, dangerous, and the punishment comes swiftly, not just for the teacher, but for the world. The flood itself may have been the first strike. In both Sumerian and biblical tradition, the flood does not just cleanse the earth of sin, it wipes out memory. It is aimed at the Apkallu, at the Watchers, at anyone who passed the line between heaven and earth. After the water recedes, the old world is gone. The sages are gone. What remains is silence. But maybe the fall of the Apkallu was not just a single event. Maybe it was a slow erosion, each generation knowing a little less, each new ruler rewriting the past, each priesthood hiding more scrolls, banning more teachings, until the Apkallu became legend, then myth, then forgotten. Still, their story survived, in broken tablets, in underground texts, in strange echoes across different cultures. The theme never changes. A being brings wisdom. The world is changed. And then the being is punished, over and over, as if the very act of sharing truth is a threat to the divine. The fall of the Apkallu is not just a story of loss. It is a warning that knowledge has a cost, and that those who dare to give it must be willing to be erased. They are remembered not through monuments, but through whispers, through the questions they leave behind, and the quiet fire they light in every mind brave enough to seek more. In the temples of ancient Egypt, lit by oil lamps and echoing with the chants of priests, there was one god who stood apart. He was not a warrior or a kingmaker. He did not command armies or demand blood. He carried a stylus, not a sword. His name was Thoth, and he was the guardian of knowledge, of writing, magic, time, and truth. With the head of an ibis, or sometimes a baboon, Thoth looked nothing like the Apkallu of Sumer. But if you listen closely to the stories, the differences begin to dissolve. And what remains might be the same figure with a new face. Thoth was said to have taught the Egyptians how to write, how to read the stars, how to calculate time. He was the scribe of the gods, the inventor of hieroglyphs, the keeper of sacred books. Some claimed he wrote 42 scrolls filled with hidden knowledge. Others believed he created the Emerald Tablet, a mysterious text that would inspire alchemists for centuries. He was the one who brought order from chaos, not by force, but by wisdom. Now step back to Sumer. Thousands of years earlier, the Apkallu rose from the sea to teach humans the exact same things. Writing, astronomy, mathematics, the building blocks of civilization, they too were messengers of the divine. They, too, were linked to sacred texts, forgotten scrolls, and ancient temples. And just like Thoth, they eventually vanished. Not because their work was done, but because their knowledge was too powerful to remain free. Both Thoth and the Apkallu appear not as rulers, but as intermediaries. They live in the space between gods and men. They guide, rather than command, and they bring light into a dark world. The parallels are too exact to ignore. Different lands, different names, but the same archetype: the teacher, the revealer, the divine librarian who dares to share. Even their animal forms tell a story. Thoth's ibis was a bird of the moon, connected to timing, balance, and messages from the beyond. The Apkallu wore the skin of fish, creatures that move through the unseen world beneath the surface. Both symbols point to beings that travel between realms, above and below, seen and unseen. It raises a bigger question. Were Thoth and the Apkallu just two sides of the same ancient figure? A memory passed from culture to culture, reshaped to fit local belief? Or were they part of something even older? A network of teachers who once walked the early earth, sharing knowledge before the flood, before the kings, before the silence? The Egyptians said Thoth never truly died, that he ascended into the heavens, becoming one with the stars. The Sumerians said the Apkallu returned to the deep, waiting. Either way, the message is the same. Wisdom doesn't belong to one nation or one name. It moves like water. It waits in the shadows. And sometimes, when the world is ready, it rises again, with a new face and the same light. The Apkallu vanished from the records. Their temples faded, their statues crumbled, but their knowledge did not disappear. It went underground, passed hand to hand, whispered behind closed doors, hidden in symbols, rituals, and codes that only a few could read. What began with fish-cloaked sages emerging from the sea did not end with clay tablets. It was reborn in robes and candles, in secret rooms and sacred texts. And the ones who carried it forward were not kings or priests, but those willing to risk everything for forbidden truth. Across history, there are moments when strange wisdom surfaces. in the dusty corners of Renaissance libraries, in the diagrams of alchemists, in the rites of secret brotherhoods. Each time it looks new. But each time, if you follow the patterns, you find something older, something familiar. A whisper of the Apkallu, resurrected under new names. Take the mystery schools of ancient Greece and Egypt, the Eleusinian rites, the teachings at the temple of Isis. These were not open to all. They demanded silence, loyalty, and a deep readiness to see beyond the surface. Initiates were sworn to secrecy. They spoke of descent and rebirth, of knowledge hidden in layers. The same themes that echoed in the stories of the Apkallu: descent from the sea, the gift of wisdom, the return to the deep. Then came the alchemists, medieval Europe. While the church burned books and punished heresy, these hidden scientists studied transformation, not just of metal, but of the self. They believed in a sacred fire, a philosopher's stone, a key to turning lead into gold, darkness into light, ignorance into understanding. And if you read between the lines of their strange manuscripts, you will find stars, geometry, and coded messages that reach back to Mesopotamia. The Freemasons followed, a secretive order claiming descent from ancient builders. They spoke in symbols, the compass, the square, the all-seeing eye. Their lodges were filled with ritual, myth, and moral lessons. But behind it all, there was a thread of something deeper, a memory of sacred architecture, of cosmic alignment, of building not just temples, but worlds, the kind of teachings the Apkallu were known for. Even today, echoes remain, in hidden libraries, in coded paintings, in the structure of secret societies whose roots are too deep to trace. They do not name the Apkallu directly, but their symbols do. Fish, stars, scrolls, water, fire, the elements of the old world reshaped and protected. It may sound like legend, like conspiracy, but history is filled with patterns that do not lie. Each time knowledge is banned, it finds a new way to survive, not on the surface, but beneath it, like a river flowing under stone. The Apkallu were not erased. They were encrypted, and their wisdom lives on in those willing to search, not in the daylight, but in the shadows, not in temples, but in the spaces between, waiting, watching, guiding those who still remember what it means to rise from the deep and speak the truth. Long before the cross became the universal symbol of Christianity, there was another mark, simple, silent, etched into walls, carved into stone, drawn in the dust. A curved line, then another, forming the shape of a fish. It was the secret sign of the early followers of Jesus. But the question is, why a fish? Why not a lamb, or a dove, or a crown? The answer may be older than the New Testament, much older, and it may lead us back to the forgotten sages of Sumer, the Apkallu. To most modern believers, the fish symbol means faith. It is tied to the Greek word ichthys, which early Christians used as a code. Each letter stood for a word: Jesus Christ, Son of God, Saviour. It was a way to hide in plain sight during times of Roman persecution. But symbols are never just about survival. They carry weight, memory, and the fish carries far more than most realize. In ancient Mesopotamia, the fish was sacred. It was the mark of the Apkallu, the half-man, half-fish beings who brought civilization to humanity. They rose from the sea, cloaked in wisdom, teaching humans how to write, build, and understand the stars. The fish became their identity. It was not just their form, it was their message. Later, in Babylon, priests would wear fish-like robes during rituals. In Assyria, Fish-garbed figures were carved into palace, walls. Even the god Dagon, worshipped by the Philistines and others, was part fish. And then, centuries later, the fish reappears in the hands of early Christians, quietly, almost like a forgotten code being reactivated. Was it a coincidence? Or was the fish chosen because it already meant something powerful, something ancient, something tied to knowledge and salvation? Consider this. Jesus chose fishermen as his first disciples. He taught beside the sea, performed miracles involving fish. Even after his resurrection, he is said to have cooked fish by the shore. It is everywhere in the Gospels, woven in so subtly it almost vanishes, unless you know what to look for. If the early church knew the story of the Apkallu, even through distorted echoes, it would make sense to borrow the fish, to take that symbol of divine wisdom rising from the deep and tie it to their new teacher. But in doing so, they may have transformed more than just meaning. They may have absorbed an older myth and reshaped it for a new age. The cross would come later, a symbol of sacrifice, of empire, of public display. But the fish came first, and it came from silence, from secrecy, from the deep. Maybe the first Christians saw Jesus not just as a savior, but as another messenger of hidden knowledge, another light rising from the waters, another voice reminding us that truth is not always written in stone. Sometimes it swims just beneath the surface, waiting for someone to notice the ripple. And when they drew that simple curve, they were not just drawing a fish. They were drawing memory. They were drawing the shadow of the Apkallu. Beneath the polished marble of Vatican City, behind locked gates and guarded doors, there exists a world most people will never see. It is not lit by stained glass or visited by pilgrims. It is the Vatican's secret archive, a labyrinth of chambers said to stretch for miles under the surface. Some call it the most powerful library on Earth. Others call it a vault of silence. But among the whispers that have escaped those halls, one stands out like a flash of lightning, that hidden somewhere in those underground shelves, protected behind centuries of papal seals, are ancient tablets from Mesopotamia. And not just any tablets, texts that speak of the Apkallu. No official document confirms this. The Vatican doesn't publish a complete list of what lies within its archive. It contains over 80 kilometers of shelves, and only a small number of scholars are ever granted limited access. The public is told that it holds church records, papal letters, and old treaties. But many believe that is only part of the truth, that deeper down, in the restricted zones, are artifacts that do not belong to Christianity at all. Artifacts that trace back to the roots of human history, to Sumer, to Eridu, to the beings who came from the sea. Rumors say that some of these tablets were taken from Iraq during the early excavations in the 19th century. Others hint they were recovered during military campaigns and quietly shipped to Rome under the guise of preservation. What makes these stories believable is the Vatican's obsession with controlling religious narratives. If the Apkallu truly existed, and if their teachings were recorded, those teachings would challenge everything the Church has built. The idea that wisdom came from sea beings before Genesis, before Moses, before the Church itself, would shake the very foundation of the story they defend. Some point to strange gaps in church history, forgotten councils, destroyed texts, sudden shifts in doctrine. All of it suggests a quiet war over knowledge, a decision made long ago that some truths must be hidden to protect the larger myth. And what better place to bury that truth than in a vault no one can enter? There are even reports from former insiders, nameless and unverified, who claim to have seen shelves lined with clay tablets, written in cuneiform, covered in dust, locked away with symbols not of crosses, but of stars and fish and waves, the language of the Apkallu, the blueprint of the First Age. If the Vatican truly possesses these texts, the question becomes why? Why guard them? Why keep them hidden while the world searches for meaning? Perhaps because they still believe knowledge is dangerous, that the past, once revealed, cannot be put back in its box. Or perhaps they are waiting, watching, choosing the moment when the story can be told again, not as heresy, but as prophecy. Until then, the answers remain sealed, the tablets remain buried, and the Vatican keeps its underwater archives exactly where it wants them, out of sight, out of reach, and deeper than anyone dares to dig. They rose from the sea, carrying knowledge no tribe or village could have imagined. They spoke of the stars, taught how to build with stone, how to track time, how to write words into clay. They shaped the first cities and vanished before history could explain them. The Apkallu were not just teachers, they were something more. But what? Were they simply wise humans from an earlier forgotten age? Were they travellers from another world? Or were they something stranger still, slipping between dimensions beyond our senses? Ancient stories describe them as part human and part fish. That image alone has caused scholars and seekers to debate for centuries. Some say it is symbolic, others say it is literal. But either way, the descriptions point to beings that did not fit the world around them. They were advanced, not just smarter, but different. They knew things people should not have known. Not in 3000 BC, not in the cradle of civilization. One theory is that the Apkallu were survivors, the last remnants of a lost civilization wiped out by global catastrophe, a flood, an asteroid, a pole shift, something that ended the world as it was and forced the survivors to start over. In this view, the Apkallu were not gods. They were ancient humans who had reached a high level of technology and understanding. When everything fell apart, they carried what they could and gave it to those who came after. But as the centuries passed, memory turned them into myths. Another theory sees the Apkallu as extraterrestrial, visitors from beyond our planet who arrived during a time of chaos and helped early humans take their first steps toward civilization. This idea is not new. From the Dogon and their stories of star beings to the legends of the Anunnaki, the idea of ancient aliens has echoed across cultures. If the Apkallu were such beings, then their fish-like form may have been how ancient people tried to describe their suits, their gear, or their strange biology. Perhaps they came not just to observe, but to teach. And then, as quickly as they came, they left. But there is a third possibility, one that fits the strange way these beings appear and disappear. What if they were not from another planet, but from another realm? Another layer of reality. Interdimensional travelers who slip between our world and theirs, through portals in the sea, through dreams, through rituals and forgotten science. In this view, the Apkallu are not bound by time or place. They return when they are needed, when the balance is broken, when truth is lost. Whichever theory you choose, one thing is clear. The Apkallu did not act like normal humans. Their knowledge came from somewhere else. Their presence changed everything. And then they vanished, leaving only stories behind, stories that refuse to die. Were they alien gods or ancient ancestors? Maybe they were both, or maybe there was something beyond both. Messengers from the deep, unknown, reminding us that our past is not what we think, and our future may depend on remembering who really lit the first fire. Time does not move in a straight line, not in the old stories, not in the sacred calendars carved into stone. The ancients believed time was a circle, that ages rise and fall like tides, that civilizations bloom, burn, and return again. And in each turning of the cycle, certain beings reappear, beings like the Apkallu, sages from the deep, teachers of light. They are not bound to one moment. They return when the world forgets what it once knew. Across cultures and centuries, the pattern repeats. When humanity is on the edge of collapse or rebirth, a figure or a group appears, often from nowhere, sometimes from the sea, sometimes from the sky. They bring knowledge, they build or rebuild, and then they vanish again. The names change, the robes change, but the role stays the same. The Apkallu of Sumer, the Thoth of Egypt, the Viracocha of the Andes, the Quetzalcoatl of Mesoamerica, even the mysterious teachers in Tibetan and Hindu tradition. All appear after great destruction. All leave behind systems of law, architecture, astronomy, and myth. What if these were not different beings? What if they were the same force, reappearing under new masks as the wheel of time turned? The flood that erased. The First Age was not the only reset. History records many. Fires, earthquakes, empires lost overnight, whole languages vanishing in a single generation. Each time, something or someone steps in to light the torch again. Not always with fanfare, often in silence. A stone here, a scroll there, a whisper in a cave, a dream that leads someone to dig. The idea of cycles is not just spiritual, it is mathematical. The yugas of India, the great year of the Greeks, the precession of the equinoxes known to the Maya and Egyptians. These were not random calendars, they were systems to track the rise and fall of ages. And many of them warned that in the Dark Age, knowledge would be lost, truth would be hidden, and the teachers would sleep. But only for a time. When the cycle turns again, the sages return. Not always in physical form, sometimes as inspiration, as ideas that spark revolutions, as movements that wake the sleeping. They do not need temples to speak. They speak through symbols, synchronicities, and sudden understanding. And when the student is ready, the teacher always arrives. So maybe the Apkallu were not destroyed. Maybe they were never fully here to begin with. Maybe they operate outside of what we call history, surfacing only when the clock resets, when the sky aligns, when the memory of what came before is needed most. In a world chasing progress, we forget that wisdom is not a straight path. It is a spiral, and the same truths keep returning, dressed in new language. The Apkallu are not stuck in the past. They are the guardians of the pattern. And the pattern is always moving, not forward, but around, again and again, until we finally remember, or forget once more. The most powerful weapon is not a sword or a bomb. It is control over what people remember. Not just their personal stories, but the entire map of the past. Because if you can erase the roots, you can shape the tree. If you can silence the old voices, you can decide which stories are told and which are never heard again. And that is exactly what happened to the Apkallu. In the oldest records, they are everywhere, teaching kings, building cities, writing laws. But flip through any modern textbook and you will find almost nothing. No mention of the fish-cloaked sages, no exploration of their connection to the roots of civilization. Just a few footnotes in dusty academic papers, if that. It is not just omission, it is a war on memory. And the battlefield runs through every classroom, pulpit, and library shelf. It began long ago, when empires realized that power did not come from truth, but from narrative. The church feared heresy, the state feared rebellion, and the universities, funded by both, learned to play along. They called it myth. They filed it under religion or folklore. And they drew a hard line between what was real and what was imaginary. The Akcalu fell on the wrong side of that line, not because they lacked evidence, but because they carried the wrong kind of truth. They reminded people that knowledge once came from the deep, from beings who were not gods, but not human either, from forces outside the sanctioned creation story. And that was dangerous, because if the Apkallu existed, then Genesis was not the beginning. If they taught humans to write and think and build, then modern civilization was not a product of divine favor, but of stolen fire. And the ones who stole it were punished, so their names were scraped off tablets, their likenesses buried, their stories diluted into safer forms. Fish gods turned into pagan idols, ancient teachers turned into fairy tales, and anyone who dared to connect the dots was labeled a heretic or a fool. The war was quiet, a war of silence, but it was relentless. Even today you will not hear about the Apkallu in most history classes. You will not see documentaries on prime time about the wisdom they gave. And if you ask too many questions, you will be told it is all nonsense, a conspiracy, a distraction from real history. But real history is exactly what is being hidden. The war on memory is not just about the past, it is about the future. Because when people do not know where they came from, they are easier to control. They do not ask the big questions. They do not search the forbidden texts. They accept the version of reality that is handed to them. But memory is not so easily killed. It lingers in symbols, in ruins, in dreams. And when enough people start to remember, the silence breaks and the war begins to lose. Because truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken, and the Apkallu are waiting to be remembered. The night sea is not empty. It is a breathing mirror, a slow heart, a library with pages that turn in the dark. If you stand at the edge long enough, the waves begin to sound like voices, and the foam writes messages that fade before you can read them. People say the Apkallu are gone, that they dissolved into myth and salt, but the water never learned how to lie. It remembers. It remembers footsteps that were not footsteps, scales that glittered like constellations, and a language older than cities, spoken without a mouth. We keep searching the horizon for ships of gold and for lost islands that rise and fall. Yet the secret is not in the distance. It is in the tide that slides over your feet, in the hush that settles when you close your eyes and listen to the quiet between the waves. Maybe the sages never left. Maybe they changed doors. Maybe the ocean is only one doorway among many, and the other door is the mind you carry behind your eyes. All the maps point outward, but the compass turns when no one is watching. It points inward, toward the room where memory waits, toward the lamp that never really went out. You do not need gills to hear the deep. You need stillness. You need courage to face the part of yourself that has always known you were born into a story more ancient than your name. The old teachers were not just shapes that walked from the water. They were patterns, and patterns do not die. They spiral. They return as questions that refuse to sleep. They return as the sudden feeling that a star has moved inside your chest. They return when a child asks why, and no one can answer without opening a forbidden book. The world taught you to look for truth in vaults and temples and archives built of stone, guarded by keys and rules and men who whisper that you are not ready. But the first archive is not underground. It is the silence within your breath. It is the dream that leaves a wet footprint on your morning. When you touch that silence, the sea answers like an old friend. It says that knowledge is not a ladder you climb. It is a shore you remember. It says that every honest question is a tide, and every act of wonder is a small dawn. It says that fear is only a locked harbour, and that love is the current that carries every ship home. So stand with the night, and let the surf count your heartbeat. Let the moon wash your doubts until they shine. Ask without shame. Listen without hurry. The teachers you seek are not past tense. They are present tense. They move through your choices. They breathe through your attention. If you want to meet them, bring an open light, not a closed book. Bring a promise to use what you learn with care. Then step into the whisper that waits where the water kisses the dark. Not everything needs to be seen to be real. Some truths are tides. Some stories are seas. And the greatest forbidden knowledge is not out there on a distant map. It is the moment you realize the ocean you have been searching for has always lived within you.